afternoon, everyone. Buonasera, as they say in Italian. I think I have a very difficult job because and a little bit unfair after. Because I think we are moving back from a very, I would say, provocative digital area. I would say after this, listening this talk, to a much more primitive way of transmitting some knowledge, I would say, in a much more traditional, conventional way. I also move, and I think I have a difficult job because I'm the last speaker on a very intense, very rich, long menu. And I hope my own little dessert, virtual dessert, will be within the context of the whole this discussion. But I will return a little bit from what we have dealt in this afternoon, let's say on specific case studies, much more back to a more general framework, and linking to have been set very much in the beginning by John Saul on the collapse of global economy. For the moment, okay, globalization is there, it's a process, it's a phenomenon, but we have not, and I have not heard anything about the role of education, how to deal, how to manage, how to accompany, how to guide all the challenges which we are facing in the process of the globalization, be it in economics, be it on politics, on culture, societal level. So because I think we have to prepare our generation, our young people, how to deal with the complexities, with the paradoxes, with the radical changes, and also with the existing intercultural, multicultural realities which we are facing in our daily life in our globalizing societies. So, and how to educate people, how to form people, there are different approaches. And we've heard there are very antagonistic views, interpretations, ideologies, open or closed approaches, disciplinary or interdisciplinary approaches. It's all there. And I think it's not an either-or debate, it's and. And we have to deal with complexities, not to be, I would say, from a very pure, exclusive economic point of view, getting rid with all the external factors. They are part of life from the very beginning. So what I would like to share with you are no data, there are no case studies, but there are some reflections. Some reflections on how the crucial role of education, crucial role of, I would say, learning, lifelong learning of education, to deal with these complexities in order to deal, to understand, to come up to responsible solutions. The purpose of my talk is to provide you with some, I'll call it a kind of prospective, conceptual framework for exploring not only the challenges but also the opportunities of the globalization for education, in understanding and responding to the specific challenges, in order to understand what I call the radical, and we heard different approaches to that, different impacts, the radical transformation of societies in times of radical change. So we have to deal with, in our daily life on different levels, with the, I would call it, the positive and negative consequence of globalization. We should be careful not to be optimistic, but also we have to be careful not to be too pessimistic. It's there, and we have to have a final, I would say, mutual interaction between economy, society, and culture in coming up with responsible solutions. So we have to deal from the very beginning with management of diversity, managing differences, managing paradoxes. And that we have to do because we have to face what we have already said. And if you look at, for instance, the Eurobarometer, saying, okay, we are dealing with increased individualism, with individual ethics. We have to deal with an increasing ignorance, an increasing indifference with people. So how can education come with some possible answers to that? Where do I place myself? And I have the help of some scholars. What is the role of education? What should be the role of education in the globalization of our societies? So I call it a kind of prelude, where I put myself. Education is the most powerful weapon that you can use to change the world. So I think we have to be prepared, we have to equip with the right tools to deal with the changes. And therefore, as Amartya Sen said, human development as an approach, and I quote, is concerned with what I take to be the basic development idea, namely advancing the richness of human life rather than the richness of the economy in which human beings live, which is only part of it. So the contextualization is important. And without Havel, without commonly shared and widely entrenched moral values and obligations, responsibilities, neither the law, the legal framework, as we heard yesterday, democratic government, nor even the market economy. We should not be trapped by a too optimistic vision, will function properly. And the last quote, where I put my, the way I look at education learning, is by Martha Nussbaum, the American philosopher, the importance of the, call it the humanistic culture, which is vital to democracy because it educates informed, empathetic, and critical world citizens, the sort of people necessary to sustain democratic societies. So that's as a start. Of course, the whole discussion of education learning has to be put in its proper context. And we have heard the different diagnoses, the contextual premises. We are dealing with a radical transformation of societies. And citizens, it was said in different, have to react to that. Citizens have to actively dialogue, participate, engage, commit in their communities on different levels. So in other words, we have to understand the zeitgeist. We have to read the signs of time. And of course, we have different approaches to do that. We are taking part of the discussion of how to manage diversity. We can do it in a multicultural way. Cultures, one next to living one next to the other, but they are not interacting. If we are accepting an intercultural approach, then we can learn from the other. The other culture is part of my own environment. So I have to understand, I have to inform, I have to listen to the other. And we are dealing with what I've already said, with the growing complexity of societies, the intertwining between levels of authority, of power, of influence making. And these different levels of governance has, of course, impact also on the legal, on the, I would say, on the economic, on the cultural impact. It's an intertwining. And we cannot just for the sake of our nice theory live in our ivory tower and just export or model or the results of our models without being aware of the contextualization. But very important, and I think what we are doing here, and therefore I thank Caroline for being here, we are part of a very interesting societal debate on values, different values. What are the values which our societies are based? The vision. Does our vision has to be embedded in our specific societies, or we can leave that out? The perception, it was already said by Manuel, the important role of perception, which creating a virtual reality. The finality of our relations, of our economic, of our political, of our interpersonal relations. So we see, okay, globalization has some benefits, but it also has, more and more, has an impact on growing individualization, on what I said, the commodification, even now, and I learned that, commodification of citizenship. Marketization, everything has a price, and the product has no price, it has no value. Commodification through the global marketplace. But on the other hand, you have an increasing impact on experiencing, experimenting dialogue in different ways, formally, informally, non-formally, also in education. We want to learn mutually from the other's experiences in respect of the other. And that was already said by John, the important role of the grassroots movement. which are reeling from the very basic trying to engage the citizens, apart from the political frustration that we have with the political elite. And of course, this dialogue of the radical transformation has a very important impact on the way of how education should be tackled, has to be revisited in a globalizing world. Various economic, political, social, cultural challenges in the age of globalization have a drastic but a very diversified impact on societies, on states, on regions, on peoples and communities. Diversified impact. There is an impact. But the way, if you look at the report of the ILO, the International Labour Organization, they look at the impact of globalization globally, and you see differentiated impacts. And you have to deal with these differences. What does it mean as a second challenge for education? That you have to think on new, innovative, creative approaches. Also, I would say, in our university, it was also mentioned, to try to introduce, I would say, a new culture of education, a different language, not trying to sit in your own ivory tower without dialoguing with your colleague from a different department. So you have to respond to the challenges of these fragmented, disturbed societies in different ways. More and more you see in different, I would say, organizations dealing with education, UNESCO, Council of Europe, more and more an important impact on the non-formal, on the informal education. So that we have, and that's a very important challenge to deal with, we have to learn to cope with changes, with radical changes, with ongoing changes, in order to live together. So we focus on education, or we should focus in our education, different disciplines, different ways of transmitting knowledge, on skills, on competences. So in that sense, what is important is not only the way you are transmitting theoretical knowledge, but also the practices, the policy-oriented way of trying to apply specific theories, pedagogies, important the case stories, testimonies, exercises to stimulate creativity and fantasy. So, briefly, two parts of my talk. One part is just, I would say, a kind of historical reminder of what is the role of culture, what is the role of education in multi- and intercultural societies. Role of culture in society, and the sociologists here, they say, okay, the role of culture can be consolidating, Durkheim, or can be transforming, can be a kind of element to transform societies. So that's why I think we should start from if you are trying to deal with education in globalization, from an anthropological definition of culture. Culture is a product, is a commodity. But it's also an asset. It's also a community of shared values. It's a carrier of local identities. And you want to reconstitute the memory of your own society. And culture, in that sense, is a kind of integrative element, a cohesive element in that. That's why trying to look at the role of culture in multi-intercultural societies, culture has different functions. You want to communicate in a verbal or a non-verbal way. You want to express ideas, artistic way, in an academic way, and so on. It's also a function of socialization. You want to create a sense of belonging to a certain community. And you want to identify that. You want to be sure, rooted in your own local community. But important here, and that's, I think, this dialogues framework is a very good example. You want to express it in different ways, starting from your identity and having a broad different role of culture in society. And then, okay, we look at the role of education in society, which is a historical process. Because education systems have been drastically changed over time, because they are shaped, they are determined by important cultural realities, big societal developments. Just 4 examples of the way societal developments shaped the way education was dealt with. Look at the invention of scriptural writing, not any longer oral transmission of knowledge, but it was written, so it was a bit much more firm as a kind of transmitting knowledge. Look at the creation of schools, which was trying to establishing, institutionalizing the way you are trying to transfer knowledge. Education, politics came in. You wanted to preserve a certain education system. Invention of printing in the 15th century. You can multiply the way you transmit your education. Just to come to the 4th element of education, what we just had as a brilliant example, the emergence of the globalizing society. Information becomes a tool, but we cannot any longer select, I would say, the hierarchy of importance of the information we get. Citizens are not any longer, they are bombarded with information. How do we select what is important, what is less important of the abundance of information? So education today, through the process of globalization, positive, negatively, can no longer be considered as a process with a secured finality. It's an ongoing process. It's a long-term, lifelong learning process. So education, therefore, becomes an ongoing process for everyone that cannot any longer be controlled exclusively by the political or the social powers. That's why the NGOs are becoming an important actor in transmitting knowledge. So, having this historical reminder of the role of society, the role of culture, the role of education in society, what now is the challenge for today's education? I have 5 concepts, 5 phases, 5 building blocks. First one, if you're talking about the role, importance of education today, we start from, I would say, a right to education for everyone. And we have an international legal framework for that. We have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, which is saying education should be free and equal and trying to protect human dignity. So we have a legal framework, a reference. Everyone has a right to education, and education shall be free. Thus we have a legal reference, although we know in reality it's not always applied and implemented. And it has a very specific purpose. Education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality, strengthening the respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial or regional groups. So there are legal references. And we are also within the European Union. We have a European Union Charter for Human Rights, which is part in an annex of the Treaty of Lisbon. So second, if we are accepting that as a basic point of departure, the right of education to all, we have a number of specific education goals. And here, with the complexity that we are dealing with in our daily life, we have to prepare youngsters, the younger generation, in order to learn to live together. How can we do that? We can learn to live together by learning to do together. So you are trying to combine, I would say, the transmission of knowledge with practices. You're learning from practices. And in that sense, you embody, I would say, the different elements. So there are a number of general objectives that we can list. And the general objectives go and have specific competences. So we are putting the general framework, which is we need to deal with education in order to increase, to develop integral human development. So economics is part of that, of course. But it's not the exclusive way of dealing with education. So it means education is not just a pure economic product, although we see in reality the privatization of university and the way degrees are being part of a commercial exchange, commodification, and so on. So I define education as a dynamic process, an ongoing process of learning that creates added value. It's not a fixed output with given inputs. It forms the person through the integral development. So you have to arouse, you have to provoke a certain lightening of a fire, arouse curiosity. What? Okay, also in the way we are dealing here with the dialogues in Karlsruhe. So we need to transmit knowledge in different ways, in a much more complex way than before, because we have different sources of knowledge gathering. And we have to much more focus on the competences, the different competences that we should try to transmit, which gives scope, responsibility to the development. I refer to the law report in '96. We are saying learning to treasure within. We have to, education should be oriented to learn to know, specificity of the knowledge. We should learn to do, learn to be, and learn to live together. And Edgar Morin has quite developed some specific ideas on the way these education processes should be developed. These general objectives of education goals should be then translated into very specific thematic competences. Okay, I just list here some personal development, healthy relations, human security, conflict resolution, cooperative problem solving, unity and diversity. It's not either or, but you have to address both. Overarching. So they are care of natural environment. So you have a number of very specific education goals which fit, I would say, in the general framework. Also that has been put, we were talking also this morning about global citizenship as one level. There are certain, Council of Europe, UNESCO is dealing also, what are the global education in order to prepare global citizens. Okay, here so a number of, I would say, inherent characteristics dealing with controversy. Yesterday we were talking about constructive antagonism. I would prefer to deal with constructive conviviality. We are confronted with different identities, identity buildings. So there are a number of elements which are put forward to practicize, to live in a world market society. Third element, so there's a right of education for all, and we have an international legal framework. There are goals, and the goals are changing within the complexity, and we should there, okay, also that was said, responsibility of citizenships. We were talking about citizenship, meaning not only rights, but also responsibilities. Just a dynamic concept of rights and responsibilities. You are loyal to, but you also are expect to have a certain responsibility to your neighborhood, to different levels. And he referred to Amartya Sen when he is talking about the Human Development Index. So if we, and we see different states, organizations are trying to promote this education for responsible citizenship. You should become responsible citizens, not an individual where you just want to be a consumer for certain goods. You have to be responsible, and this responsibility has certain rights and duties of the individual. That means you need information, you need knowledge, and you need a certain competence, open behavior, understanding of what are the major fundamental values. But, and that is important, that should be understood, translated into the specific socio-economic culture context. You cannot just across the board just to import a certain model. You have to understand the specific contextualization because complexities are there, cultural disintegration is there, dispersion, fragmentation, as was said by the previous speaker. So you have to integrate diversity on different levels of learning, from the formal, the non-formal, and the informal learning. Meaning, you have to prepare the citizens to be proactive. That is again translated into specific objectives of the education for responsible citizenship. And I would say it was mentioned before, you have to develop a certain literacy, political literacy, cultural literacy, digital literacy in order to become a responsible citizen. You have to, and that's, I would say, a major challenge of our present education systems, of our universities, you have to develop critical thinking, not accepting certain results of certain theories without, I would say, developing one's own argumentation. And you have to actively participate on different levels, from the local up to the higher level. And there, okay, you can propose a number of trajectories in favoring and developing education for responsible citizenship. Was mentioned already different times, you have to start more and more with an interdisciplinary curriculum building. You have to start talking with your colleagues from different departments, because reality is complex and reality should be using the different interdisciplinary tools. Important for the teacher education, but sometimes, okay, professors, old professors are not willing to participate in this kind of complexity of intertwining models. Teacher support, and you have to put that into a wider social context. Universities should have a direct link with with the legal, I would say not with the legal, with the societal environment. Okay, that means that there are a number of challenges, there are a number of competences, not only on the cognitive level, transmitting knowledge, it should be functional, that means it should be applied knowledge, but it should also be, I would say, ethical grounded. Principles of, what does it mean, the red card? Stop? Can I at least finish the two elements? Okay. So I know that you have to bear a little bit, but okay. Because before you were saying 5 minutes, I didn't see the 5 minutes. Sorry. Okay. So there are a number of challenges, there are a number of competences, which is also on the intuitive, the affective level. And that has an impact on the way you try to live and properly to it. Fourth one is the intercultural education. You have to understand the different cultures in your own environment. That means you have to install patterns of availability, openness. And that means that you have to develop in your education system intercultural competences. Okay, you have a list of competent values, attitudes, cognitive behavioral skills, knowledge and understanding behavior. My last slide. You have to, and we are dealing with a very specific practical tool with the Anna Lund Foundation, which is a foundation dealing with the intercultural dialogue in the Euromed, in order to prepare a handbook on intercultural citizenship education, recognizing a number of specific characteristics, but trying to put that into practice with exercises, with a number of practices. So what the major challenge of this intercultural citizenship education is a tool to live, to do together with multiplicity of identities, multiplicity of citizenship. And that means a number of characteristics that has to be taken into account. Certainly the learning and teaching of intercultural life competence, which is a major mission, vision that should be much more strengthened in European university. And I start as a last slide a saying of Mahatma Gandhi, which in a certain sense refers to this mutual interaction of paradoxes. I do not want my house to be walled in on all sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the culture of all the lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible, but I refuse to be blown off my feet by any. Okay, thanks a lot. And hope